Oh, goody.
Alright, what's up everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Mercenaries video. So we're doing another episode of a Meta Monday. Wanted to wait to put this one out because I knew we had a patch coming soon that I had a feeling was going to change up some stuff in terms of buffs, and that did end up happening last week. So I figured we would put that off to this week to see if we can get an idea how any of these changes are having any initial impact on the meta. So we're going to be breaking it down here, taking a look at some win rates like we did last time, and then we will get into our kind of meta graph to get a feeling for what is being played a lot right now. So before we get into it, if you enjoy this type of content, do remember to like and subscribe. Does a ton to help out the channel and keeps the Mercenaries videos coming. But yeah, let's dive right on into a Meta Monday episode number 11. So for this one, we obviously had the patch very recently, so the data we are going to be looking at is much smaller sample size. For that reason, I ended up using the top 20% for the graph instead of top 10%. As we can see here, top 10%, there just really isn't much data. It's only been about 3,500 games or so, and it's really not telling us a whole lot. We will take a quick look at it before we look at the top 20% data, though. There are a few reasons for this, too. I think we're kind of in between content right now for Mercenaries, waiting for Finley and Cthulhu, who are coming out soon, as well as the next big drop, which is still a little bit ways away. So, and it's summertime, so that usually does also lead to a decrease in player count and viewership and all that stuff, as people are doing other things. So, looking at the top 10% here, minimum 200 games, there are only 5 comps showing up, really kind of surprising. And interestingly enough, 2 of these 5 aren't even getting a 50% or higher win rate, even though they are the most played. And I wanted to provide a little bit of insight into that. So the first one here, we have the new version of like Freeze Valera, and personally, I hate this comp with a passion, even though I don't even think it's necessarily that good. It just reminds me of the glory days of Valera, Varden, Belinda, and turns out freezing everything at 2 speed or 1 speed is not very fun. So yeah, they're running Valera, Trigor, and Grom here, with Varden with the Band of Frost, Belinda, and Maestra on the bench. You're swapping out your Valera to get her stealth. Maestra comes in, does a bunch of damage, and then you're trying to get your Valera, Varden, and Belinda in at the same time to freeze lock your opponent, scale up, and then close out the game. This one has about 670 games in the top 10%, but only a win rate of 47.7%. So providing a little bit of insight into this comp can be really annoying to play against, but once more people learn how to play against it, I think it's going to continue to fall off in win rate. And the big tip against this one is you really have to pick off their units kind of one at a time if possible. You don't want to give them that 2 or 3 unit swap in so they can get their synergies going with the speed and the slow. If you manage to do that, it all kind of falls apart. And Shadow is a really, really hard counter to this build. So if you're running into a lot of it, definitely just whip out the Shadow and they're going to have a bad time. I do think Shadow has not been being played as much, and that's not because Shadow is bad. I actually think Shadow is probably still the best comp in the game right now. I think people are just trying out new stuff because of the balance changes and the buffs we got, and because of that, this comp is becoming a bit more popular as people are trying to prey on the experimental builds. But even though it's trying to do that, it looks like global win rate really not that impressive, surprisingly. Then the Frost comp, so Localar, Jaina, Varden with Sinestra, Karen, Diablo. I mentioned this last episode of Meta Monday, but this is the traditional bot comp. A lot of bots end up using this comp, and it's not really as good as it used to be. It's a lot more easily counterable now, and it's not even the best build of Frost in my opinion. So not really surprised that it's also not doing that well, coming in at 45.1% win rate over 650 games. Yeah, pretty much the same thing that happened last time. Bots are using this, maybe some players who are coming back to the game from launch. This doesn't really require any new mercenaries aside from Localar and Sinestra, who are both rares and pretty easy to level up, so I could see that being part of the reason for the popularity, but overall, definitely better versions of Frost out there. Then the traditional summon build, so N'Zoth, Cho, and Yulon lead into the Sinestra, Cookie, and Malfurion bench, coming in at a pretty decent win rate here of 59.1% over 270 games. This comp, honestly, I think is more well-positioned right now as well because of the popularity of the new Summon Anaconda build. N'Zoth definitely gets a lot of value against that because you can kind of take their snake on turn 1, and that really shuts down what they're trying to do, while also doing some powerful minion stuff of your own. And you can just make your own snake big, basically, that you stole from them. So this one's really fun. Definitely recommend trying it out, especially if you're running into a lot of the big snake build. And we have the kind of old reliable here, the Arcane bench, the Trigor Valera lead, so Nefarian, Trigor, and Valera, into the Karen, Tyrande, Longjin bench. One's coming in at 61.5% win rate and 230 games played. Really not much to say about this one. It's still really powerful. I think it might be better to put Reno in over Valera. I've seen that build have a lot of success, but either way, you really can't go wrong with this. Getting that initial high damage off Trigor into the very powerful Arcane bench finish. And then last but certainly not least, we have our standard Shadow build of Yasharaj, Kazakis, and Vol'jin with the Ashara, Cookie, and Sylvanas bench. Highest win rate of the bunch here with 65.9% win rate over 200 game sample size. Actually been seeing a lot less Shadow, surprisingly. Kind of like I said before, I think that is because people are experimenting with new stuff. People have played Shadow a lot, so they're trying to find out other builds. So it's not quite as played as it should be relative to how strong it is. I think Shadow is the strongest comp in the game right now, potentially, if it is played perfectly. The only thing about that is that I think the vast majority of people, including myself, do not play it perfectly. It's actually surprisingly challenging to play it perfectly, like pretty much anything in Mercenaries is. Mercenaries is pretty hard to play totally perfect, but even if you're playing fairly decent with Shadow, you should still have a good performance with it. Now we will take a quick look at the win rates in the 20%, as there are a lot more comps here. We can still see, even over a larger sample size, that the Valera, Trigor, Grom with the Frost bench still not really performing very impressively. Same with the standard Frost comp here, both still hovering around or just below that 50% win rate. So we'll actually sort by win rate here, see what's on top. And this was kind of interesting to see. So there is actually a different variant of Frost here. Standard Frost Open with the Jaina, Localar, Varden, but new kind of bench with Yulon, Sinestra, and Cookie. I haven't seen this one myself, and I haven't tried it out yet, but 68.2% win rate. Smaller sample size, of course, because not crazy amount of games played by any of these comps, 250 games here, but maybe that's the way to go for new Frost. Maybe this is the new secret sauce compared to the Bane combo bench version that we were seeing before. Then we have Arcane that we saw before, again putting up very solid win rate here, 63.2% over 410 games. Shadow, again, still doing really well, 63.1%, just under 400 games. And then here we can see the Reno version I was talking about of Arcane, performing pretty similar to the other version, a little bit smaller sample size, but still over 60% win rate, so looking pretty good. This is one I'll talk a little bit about when we get to the graph chart, but this is actually like a new pirate build. Edwin, Trigor, Hook Tusk with Maestra, Patches, and Mr. Smite. surprisingly, this one's coming in pretty high, 61% over 240 games. I don't really understand this comp yet. I actually tried this out a little bit on ladder today and didn't really go super well for me. I don't know if that's because I was playing it wrong or if it's just a little bit overhyped in the stats, but it's interesting, that's for sure. So if you want something to try out Hook Tuscan, maybe this is the way to go, but I'm not totally sold on this build yet. Here again, we have the summon build that we saw before. Doing pretty good. Some more games here, a little bit above 60% win rate. Another variant of Shadow coming in just under 60%, 58.1 over 300 games. Swapping out that cookie for Localar. And then yet again, another version of Shadow. This used to be the most popular version, but I think the cookie version is definitely the better version right now compared to the Lich King version. If you really do need that red, I think Localar is probably the way to go. But Lich King still not bad, coming in with the Lich King Shadow variant at just under 58% win rate over 460 games. Then finally a new comp. We're actually seeing a new comp here, which is cool. The big snake build I was talking about that Wizard Beast put together. So we have Cho, Anaconda, and Yulan. Her equipment isn't updated here on the site, but her equipment is actually the summon, Battlecry summon the snake, and then Sinestra, Cookie, Malfurion bench. So pretty cool comp here, coming in at 56.7% win rate, 200 games. And then the last two, like we saw before, these are the Valyria, Trigor, Grom, Freeze comp, and the old version of Frost, both coming in under 50%. So not really too impressive there. That's just giving a little bit of a pulse on the meta. Again, this is just in the last week. We don't have as much data as we normally do because obviously the patch dropped pretty recently. So, and I did want to only get data from that time since we've had the patch essentially. All right, so that's going to be it for our little win rate overview here. Do want to give a honorable mention to the Naga comp I featured in yesterday's video. Definitely recommend checking that one out. We don't have hard data on it yet, but I know myself and a few other players have been checking it out and been doing some pretty good results with it. And there's actually another Naga build I saw that looked pretty good that I will be featuring later this week. So if you're interested in the Nagas, definitely stay tuned for that, as well as some Explorer Finley builds when he arrives on Tuesday. But we are going to take a look at our meta chart for this week, and we'll see what the representation is looking like in the top 20% here. So we have a much more broken up pie chart here, and obviously not as many comps as we saw last time, because again, we're working with a smaller sample size of data here. But the biggest one here, coming in at just under 20%, is the Valyria, Trigor, Grom, Varden, Belinda, Maestra comp. Again, I think this comp is fairly strong, but once you figure out how to play against it, and especially if Shadow is being played very prevalently, I just don't see this comp being very good in the long term. It is coming in at 1,000 games, so a lot of people are playing it right now, but I do think that number will fall off eventually as people learn how to play around it a little bit better. Next up, we have the standard Frost comp, like old school Frost comp. And again, I think the numbers here are a bit inflated due to bots and or older returning players. This one's coming in at 15.9% of the meta with 810 games, and that's the standard Localar, Jaina Varden, Sinestra, Karen, and Diablo. I was really surprised to see that the summon comp is this big of a portion of the meta, but it kind of makes sense when you consider the fact that the big snake comp has been getting more popular, and I think there is pretty much no better counter here than the old school big summon build. So N'Zoth, Cho, Yulan with the Sinestra, Cookie, Malf bench. That one's coming in at 750 games with 14.7% of the metagame share. So these three comps right here
basically representing half of the meta right now. Again, I think if we were looking at more realistic player numbers that were not inflated for this version of Frost, it would probably be smaller. It's possible that this is being played at a little bit lower MMR and we just don't see it as much, where we are a little bit higher up on the ladder. Hard to say, but if you are seeing a lot of this comp, definitely let me know in the comments below, because I'm definitely curious about that information. Next up, we have the Shadow build here, Shadow Lich King, the most popular version still, it seems, of the Shadow build. Yasharaj, Kazakis, Vol'jin, Ashara, Sylvanas, Lich King, coming in at 9% with 460 games. Then we have our first Arcane build here, the classic Nefarian Trigor Valera, Karen, Tyrande, Longjin, coming in at 8.1% of the meta and 410 games played. We have the, I think, best version of Shadow right now, or at least tied for best, with the Yasharaj, Kazakis, Vol'jin, Ashara, Cookie, and Sylvanas. So swapping out that Lich King for Cookie, coming in at 370 games with 7.3% metagame share. And then we have the Localar version just behind it. Same comp, except we're swapping out Cookie for Localar. That one is coming in at 300 games and 5.9% of the metagame. So Shadow is making up a pretty significant portion. If we add up all these together, that pretty much is about a quarter of the whole chart here, and most of the Shadow comps are playing out pretty similarly. Next, we have the Reno version of Arcane, so Nefarian Trigor Reno, Karen, Tyrande, Longjin. This one's coming in at 300 games as well, with 5.9% metagame share. And then we have that new version of Frost. I'm actually very interested in this one because it seemed to be performing very well, even though it is a little bit smaller of a sample size. But if you're looking for something new to try with Frost, it looks like this might be worth trying out. Jaina Localar Varden, standard opener, with the Yulon Sinestra Cookie bench. That one's coming in at 250 games with 4.9% metagame share. Then we have the kind of strange pirate comp, the Edwin Trigor Hooktusk, Maestra Patches Smite, coming in at 240 games with 4.7% of the metagame share. This one really took me by surprise. I don't think I've seen anybody play this. I tried it out a little bit myself, and it kind of felt underwhelming. That could be because I was new to the comp, and I didn't know how to play it correctly, but the pirates definitely do not hit as hard without the buffs from characters like Tyrion or Elise. So I think it might be worth trying to find room for putting one of them in there, because pirates really do need those damage and HP buffs, in my opinion, to be very effective. I honestly think the kind of classic Frost Tyrion with the pirates, or just in general the big pirate comps, are still probably the better version of pirates, but it seems for some reason they have fallen out of popularity recently. And then last but not least, we have the new flavor of the week here, the Big Snake comp from Wizard Beast, the Cho Anaconda Yulon, with Sinestra, Cookie, and Malfurion bench. This one's coming in at 200 games with 3.9% of the metagame. So there we have it. Again, this data was collected from the past week, July 25th through today, August 1st, in the top 20% of Mercenaries players. Pretty interesting stuff. I think it mostly lines up with what I've seen. There are, I think, a lot of weird experimental comps going on right now that just aren't being played enough to show up in the data. So we will have to keep an eye on this, especially as Finley is coming out tomorrow. I'm sure that's going to change some things up because he looks fairly powerful. So we're going to keep an eye out on that. And you can expect another Meta Monday update probably in 2 weeks' time, once there's been a little bit more time for people to test with all these new buffs and with the new character. we should also have Cthulhu coming in shortly around that time. So that's another thing to look forward to that might change things up a little bit. But that is pretty much going to do it for this episode of Meta Monday. A little bit less data than I usually like having, but I did want to get this out before we got even more changes and we saw more of the impact from the changes from last week. So we have a little bit of something to compare to once the meta kind of further refines with the new characters and the new changes. But that is going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, do remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.